Nonprofit friends, welcome back to another episode of a modern nonprofit podcast. I'm thrilled to have you all here. And by being here, it tells me that you all are trying to learn something new. You probably have some problem to solve. And it's always so humbling to me to see so many people that plug in every single week and give me a little bit of their time. Admittedly, Lou, I didn't share this with you earlier, but it's kind of surprising. Like I started this podcast sort of accidental. I used to find myself in these conversations all the time with really cool people like yourself, Lou. And we're just talking about things that are relevant to the nonprofit space. And we're coming up with creative solutions for solving challenging problems, especially with limited resources. And I thought, let me just start recording these conversations and then just putting them on a platform for people to listen to. And it's always so humbling to me how many people reach out like, oh, I love the podcast. There's so many great content, different topics. So thank you all for spending your time with me, especially now, especially in this season. It's hard. Life in the nonprofit world is so hard right now. I
Oh
laugh
yeah.
because it's better than crying, but nonetheless, thank you all for coming and spending some time with me and validating that. But today we're going to talk about something, I don't know, I find myself very interested in marketing, digital marketing, all of the things that are evolving, like everything else, I suppose, in the nonprofit world. I like to geek out on these things, as most of you that listen regularly probably know. I'm kind of a marketing branding junkie, but I love all things operational, which is why I love this podcast. But I'm not going to be having this solo conversation today. I brought along my new friend, Lou. Lou, I forgot to even ask how to pronounce your last name, but
No worries.
to prevent myself from botching that, Lou.
It's Lou Kotsinis.
There we go. And Lou, you are the CEO of BCS Interactive,
That's
and
right.
you work with, nonprofit marketing and digital strategy.
Yep.
In the world of storefronts on a digital landscape, I think this
Mhm.
is more and more and more relevant to the world we live in now.
Yeah.
And admittedly, the nonprofit world is a little bit behind, I think, on the digital marketing landscape. I think number one, it's just overwhelming, confusing. There's so many moving parts all the time. And also, it can be a little cost prohibitive for many of us. But you're going to help us talk a little bit more today about what are those trends to get us up to speed, hopefully, a little bit on what you're seeing, and share with us a little bit more about the future of nonprofit marketing and maybe how nonprofits can position themselves to be successful in
Yeah.
this area. So, Lou, thank you also for spending some time with me today and sharing a little bit more of your insights in this area.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here, Tasha.
Well, let's just dive right in. I like to just throw the softball questions. Let's talk a little bit about bring us along a little bit on the journey on how, from your perspective, nonprofit marketing has evolved over the last 10 years.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. Ever since Google came to dominate the web, and here we're looking at
Mhm.
like 2004,
Yeah.
2005 or so, where they really started to dominate search, we were
Hmm.
taught, and then we are in turn taught our clients that everything revolves around the website, right?
Okay.
You want to rank first when a person searches on a topic related to your cause. You want to send as much traffic as possible to your website. That really
Hmm.
didn't change when social media came around, right? Because,
Right.
social is a really a great place for you to build a community and spread the word about your cause. But even then, you were still trying to get people back to your website, right? You're dropping
Right.
links wherever you can and getting them back to that all important space. So everything in the last 10 or 15 years has really revolved around quote unquote getting them to click, right? And
Hmm.
and the big vanity metric has always been website traffic. Well, how much traffic is coming to your website and how much time are people spending there and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But that now is changing, and it's changing super dramatically. Unlike things that we have seen, I've been around long enough to have seen the major iterations in this industry. So
Okay.
it's gotten to the point where it's come along in kind of a cohesive change, which I'm really just calling the future of nonprofit marketing. I know that's really kind of dramatic, but it is actually where we are now and definitely where we're going.
Okay. Okay. You've got me nervous because I'm in the middle of redoing my website, Lou, and I
Yeah,
just got off a call with a consultant I'm working on. It's like, okay, how can we build, web
sure.
traffic and kind of seeing how that's evolving. So
Yeah,
you gave us a little bit of teaser. Things are changing. You're right. I mean, that's everything that I've known that
yeah,
the
yeah.
website is key. And I think the daunting task for nonprofits, they already know like their website is broken, even if you didn't just say what you're saying.
Right, right.
And even if you say websites are maybe not the pinnacle of like all digital marketing. We all know that we've got some catch up there to do,
Sure.
but there's certainly been a rise, like you kind of alluded to, other tools that people are using around social media and podcasting and video content
Yeah.
and using all of this content in their way of storytelling. Um, so then I guess my next question is if that's where we've been, what is the future of nonprofit marketing? What are you
Sure.
seeing now and how is that shifting specifically?
Sure. Well, first of all, there's a lot to be optimistic about. I didn't mean to make you nervous. And the funny thing is that when I package it this dramatically, saying the future of digital marketing, there's a lot to be excited about, and especially with
Okay.
respect to the website. So I can get into that a little bit. But there's basically three major changes that we are advising our nonprofit clients to look out for and to start to adapt to. Okay. So I'll just
Mhm.
list them first, and then we can talk about them in depth if you like.
Okay.
So the first is something called zero-click marketing.
Okay.
We can talk about that. The second is the rise of AI search, artificially intelligent enabled search, meaning
Hmm.
people are going to AI platforms to find answers as opposed to going to Google or moving slightly
It's
away
true.
from Google. And the third is what I call the evolving role of the website. The term I've been using is the website as validator. I need to come up with a better brand than that, but right now that's how I'm kind of defining it.
Okay.
So these three taken together are really changing the way that nonprofits need to organize themselves online in order to be found and to grow. So they're distinct topics, but they tie into one another. So if you like, we can go into each one individually and kind of define what they are.
Yeah, could you? Because I'm not familiar with some of these, and that just makes me look, like I'm, informed with these things once I start
Sure.
embarking on some of these projects. So what is this zero click marketing you're referring to?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I can't take credit for this one. This was kind of found and branded by a guy named Rand Fishkin, who works at
Mhm.
Spark Toro is the name of his organization. He's a very, very strong, smart digital marketer, and he caught on to this a few years back. So I'm kind of borrowing that concept, but it's entirely applicable to what nonprofits do. So the idea here is that if you think about it in your own capacity, people are now spending more and more time on individual platforms like
Mhm.
apps or social media channels rather than simply going to websites. And what I mean by that is like they're not clicking out. They're basically
Mhm.
staying where they are. So if you think about it in your own day to day or in mine, like I like Instagram, I can be on Instagram for half an hour and
Right.
not even realize I'm there. And when I'm there, I'm not clicking anywhere, right?
Right.
First of
Oh, I
all
see.
the content I need is right there. And also these channels, they want you to stay there. So they will prevent you from adding links. As you know, on Instagram, you can't even add a link into the
Right.
body of what you're writing. You have to go search for it. And that
Sure.
goes for all of the channels. So the idea with zero click is that you're engaging with a nonprofit right within the channel where you're at. And it's not just social media, Tasha. If you think about it, when we get
Mhm.
emails these days from like our favorite cause, and you get the email, most likely you're just going to skim what comes in
Right.
on that email. Chances are you might click on the link if you find it really interesting and it's really valuable for you. But it's just this idea of people enjoying and engaging a brand or a nonprofit in the channel they've picked. That's what zero
Mhm.
click is.
Interesting. And what was the second one that you said?
The second is AI search. So
Oh,
AI
yes.
search is just that. So AI bots like ChatGPT or Claude, which is my favorite, or Perplexity, which is another good one.
Hmm.
They provide, I don't know if you have experience working with them, but
Oh, for
if
sure.
you search for something there, they will provide you exactly what you're looking for. And then the added benefit is you can begin to have a conversation with them, a very intelligent and in-depth conversation. So in truth, like why go anywhere else, right?
Yeah.
So you're starting to see a little bit of a move away from Google. It's still nothing to run to the hills about in
Right.
fear. Google still has a massive share of the market, and they themselves are also implementing AI search now in their platform as well too. But you're starting to see a shift. Like for example, I start my day going to Claude. I don't really go to Google anymore unless there's something I need a
Hmm.
specific website for. So
Hmm.
even there, you won't see links within those platforms, right? You don't have to. So that's another move away from into that kind of zero click
Hmm.
marketing. The last component, we spoke about zero click, we spoke about AI search. The last is this concept of website as validator, which will answer the concern that you had at the beginning of the conversation. It's funny, the way I've been talking, you would think I'm meaning, the death of the web and the
Right.
website. Far from it, right? I
Yeah.
think what's happening with these changes is that the website is actually becoming more important for a
Hmm.
nonprofit because even as people are going into these channels in a zero click sense and engaging, they're getting deeper and more immersed within that brand, within that nonprofit. And at the end of
Hmm.
the day, the true, what I call a true believer, a person who is really engaging with that cause, is inevitably going to want to learn more. And they are going to themselves take the step to get to your website. So in a sense, it's like the website is going to get less traffic, but it's going to get
Hmm.
higher quality traffic. So it's so important that you have a great user experience there and you're telling your story properly and you're engaging people because you're
Yeah.
getting this individual that really wants to believe in you. So you kind of want to justify that through the experience you're giving them.
Okay, well, the good news is, Lou, I personally am no longer overwhelmed because you validated a lot of things that I've been hearing. And I will plus one on everything that you just said, because even in my own personal brand, like with the Charity CFO, I have experienced more and more like prospective clients reaching out to us like, oh, I found you on like ChatGPT. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and they kind of understand or get to know us more, like you were saying, in different platforms. And I've noticed the traffic patterns changing on our website by way of, people are going before when they would go and like read, our services and what we do and, all that. And then maybe they'll like schedule a call to chat with us and see if we
Right.
might be a good fit for them. Sometimes they're coming straight away to just
Mhm.
booking a consultation right away when it's like, oh, wow, well, you've only been to our website a
Yeah.
couple times or you didn't spend very much time on it. So I could see that absolutely being true for any business, for profit or nonprofit,
Hmm.
that they're just getting to know you if you are available on these other platforms.
Correct.
They're getting to know you before they actually ever even go to your website. And to your point, they're using your website as maybe confirmation or reaffirming some of the things that they already thought, or just a way to actually get connected to you.
Yeah, 100%. And so, what you're pointing at is this idea that wherever your audience is online, and you need to do the work to find that out, that is
Right.
where you should be building a presence. And
Hmm.
with the idea that you want to make sure you're engaging with them there, you're giving them the appropriate information based around your story, that you're being
Yeah.
consistent across all of these platforms. And again, investing in that website so that when an individual comes there, there's no doubt in their mind. They can find what they're looking for. They
Hmm.
feel they're in the right place, and you've made it easy for them to continue doing business with you.
Hmm. So that kind of brings me to my next question. I mean, anybody listening is going to be on a different spectrum of like where they're at with all
Right.
these things. This might
Right.
be totally like, okay, I am so behind here.
Right.
Or, hey, I've got parts of these, or hey, we're on different platforms.
Sure.
This is kind of a big loaded question, but how do nonprofits or what should they be doing to start adapting to some of these changes in order to I would like to say be successful, but
Right.
sometimes just like feel like they're getting caught up or even just like staying up with the times or
Sure.
maintaining their position in digital marketing. What do you recommend your clients to kind of prioritize or focus
Sure. So
on?
the first thing is, though, to kind of reassure some of those fears, this is an ongoing process, right? And a lot of this is
Absolutely.
really new. So it's not a matter of feeling overwhelmed, although I can understand that. The first thing that you need to do is really go back to fundamentals and build a
Hmm.
good foundation that will help you no matter what you do going forward. And
Hmm.
and look at it as a long-term process. It's not a one and done thing. And that can kind of help alleviate some of that anxiety. But it does have to get done though. It's not a matter of just kind of
Hmm.
sitting back and saying we can do it 6 months down the line because then you will kind of fall behind. The first thing
Hmm.
that we recommend that clients do is to make sure that you have your story down, right? That's the most
Hmm.
important thing because story, as you'll probably agree, Tosh, is the strongest asset that a nonprofit has. This is the
Yeah.
reason why people are following you is because of your story. So you
Hmm.
want to, and call it mission, call it positioning, call it brand. I use those things interchangeably, but it needs to be clear, engaging, impactful. It needs to be consistent. And once you
Yeah.
have that story together, you can then start to distribute that across all of the different channels. And that would be my second kind of step recommendation, which is to start to tell that story within each platform where you have an audience, right? The
Hmm.
idea there is just be comfortable staying within that platform, telling that story over and over again, talking about your mission, talking about your services without this kind of desperate need to, oh, get back to our website and make a donation
Right.
today. It's
Right.
kind of a long term build. And that's how you're kind of building that zero click capacity. A really good
Hmm.
example I've been following lately is the International Rescue Committee. If you check
Mm.
them out on Facebook, it's clear that they're doing this. Like you could go to that platform, stay with
Hmm.
them for a couple of days on and off, and you'll get a really good gist for what they do and the impact that they're making. So that might be kind of a good model. It's not this concept of never putting links in. It's a concept of
Right.
just getting people comfortable in those different channels. So that would
Gotcha.
be a second recommendation. With respect to AI search, just recognize that this is brand new and it's
Hmm.
changing constantly. So take some, reassurance in that. But the bottom line is that AI platforms, they're trained on something called data sets. That's where they're getting their information from. And that
Hmm.
varies from platform to platform, depending upon which one you're on. But you can think of things like, okay, it's drawing from the web. We know that. They draw from like proprietary information sets, like, they'll purchase or get a license to a certain set of information or content. And they're also
Hmm.
looking at your social channels as well, too.
Okay.
So the early word on AI search is that they are looking for mentions of your nonprofit, of your brand across different websites.
Hmm.
So in general, what we advise clients to do is take that story that you've developed and put excerpts or chunks of it in the different locations where your audience resides and continue to
Hmm.
hammer home on that. Because if you've done an AI search before, what does it do? It pulls up the most important, the most relevant information about your brand. So it's
Hmm.
doing that. And a second recommendation is try to get your organization placed or mentioned on websites that are popular for your particular cause. So for example, if
Hmm.
you're a leader in cancer research, right, ensure that you're being mentioned on sites where people will be looking for that data and those findings. Or
Okay.
if you're a community food bank, look to be placed in local online news outlets where people can see the good that you're doing. That's where these things are drawing from. So,
Okay.
um, in a sense, there's a big PR component in all of
Hmm.
this as well, too. And that's kind of where things are going. So it's a matter of getting your story straight, focusing on developing that zero-click marketing, preparing yourself slowly for AI search or as quickly as you can. And the
Hmm.
last point to what we've kept coming back to is make sure your website is as good as it can be. I like calling it
Okay.
flawless, but flawless is a hard thing for many organizations to achieve. But because remember who's coming, right? The true believers are
Right.
coming. So again, strong, clear brand, really engaging content, and just a great user experience. And I'm happy to break down any of that because I realize any one of those
Yeah,
steps.
I have lots of questions because
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I'm kind of anticipating if I were a leader of a nonprofit. This is a really basic question, but I think really important for those that are
Sure.
listening. We sometimes say, and admittedly in previous, like, different episodes that I've recorded around marketing, we talk about branding, we talk about story, and it's like, that's such a broad, overwhelming thing, but it
Mhm.
also sounds so simple. So,
Sure.
like, what does that actually mean? Because I think some people, I think most people probably think that they have their story down,
Right.
right? And
And
so,
and that may
but
be
they
the
may
case.
not. So, like,
Right.
in you, like, maybe could you give an example of like, this is what I kind of think about, like, this person really has their story down, just to kind of paint us what that looks like.
Sure.
In not an overly complex, like I don't expect a whole, like, 60-minute, explanation of what that looks like, but
Right.
just to kind of say like, okay, I do have my story down or I don't, or do I
Yeah.
have a story or do I not? Like some people might think it's just a mission statement or a vision statement, or I have a couple testimonials, or like, yeah, I can describe what I do, but yeah. So what does that mean for
People
those listening?
define story differently. As far as our agency is concerned and what we advise clients, we really do simplify it, right? It comes down
Mhm.
to why do you exist as an organization? What is your mission?
Mhm.
How are
Mhm.
you changing the world? What is it that makes you different? I see
Mhm.
that as one kind of understanding, right? What is our
Right.
mission? And then who is it that we are serving? Who is that specific audience or maybe one or
Mhm.
two audiences? And then does that messaging resonate with that audience? So as you're talking, one example that came to mind is we work with the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, and
Mhm.
they work to preserve land throughout the state of New Jersey for
Mhm.
conservationists and individuals that just appreciate outdoor space. I don't have their tagline off the top of my head,
Sure.
but they do a great job of just hammering home consistently what it is they do and
Mhm.
the value that they bring and who they're doing it for. So those are the principles I would look at. It doesn't need to
I
be
love
too
that.
overly
Yeah.
complicated. Yeah. By definition, Tasha, every nonprofit has a beautiful human story. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be volumes worth of material. It has to be
Right.
what is it that we do that may, why do we come to work in the morning? What is our mission at the end of the day? Who
Hmm.
is it that is going to benefit from this mission? Let's combine those two and start writing from there. I'm not talking about logo, right? When people think
Right.
brand and positioning, they think, oh, well, now we have to change our logo.
Colors,
Yeah, the
logos,
logo, it's important, but
aesthetic.
it comes after the fact, right? You get your
Yeah.
story down first and your principles and who you're serving. And if
Hmm.
you get those few sentences or paragraphs right, all the other content that you develop is going to emanate from that. You
Right.
know, I think too many organizations worry about getting it all right up front and having it all, just get those core elements down, and then you'll start to organically talk about it. And then you can reassess your logo and say, okay, now based on that, does that logo make sense? Is it clear? When a person looks at that, do they think this? And
Right.
that's kind of the process that we take. And then from there, the rest, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it falls into place. So you can work
Yeah.
with an agency like us to do your website and take that story and make it right. You can work with an agency like us to make sure the communications on social are coming out or advertising or what have you. So I
Right.
hope that wasn't a 60-minute.
No, no, that's helpful. And what was coming through my mind, and I always like think about all the things that I've learned about marketing was not when I worked at a nonprofit as the CFO. It was certainly not in business school when I was studying to become a CPA, right?
Right.
Everything I've learned about marketing is because I'm now, a business owner that wants to make sure that the work that we do is known. Like I said, we could be the best accounting firm in the world, but if no one
Yeah.
knows about us, then it doesn't really matter. I don't know.
100%.
And I've gone through this journey of understanding marketing and what that means. And the things that's coming to my mind when you're talking about simplicity in your story, and you've probably heard of this, and hopefully you're not, I hate that. But it reminds me of a book. I think it was a book uh, that referenced this. It's Story Brand. I'm sure you've heard
Yeah.
of the book, right?
Yeah.
Super popular in the world of
Sure.
marketing. And I always think about my journey as a for-profit entrepreneur and what that experience might have been complementary to my life as a, director of a nonprofit, right?
Mhm.
And I was kind of thinking about this as you were describing it, and I believe this book said this, but I spent a lot of time with this book and its content because my takeaway was that people buy, plug in the words support, right?
Mhm.
If
Sure.
I'm trying
Yeah.
to translate it to the nonprofit
Right.
world, people buy not necessarily from the best.
Mhm.
It's who they believe can solve their problem as quickly and like well understood as possible. So
Right.
the intersection of they are clear that you can understand that you can solve their problem and they understand what you do, and the
Right.
person that can do that basically the fastest is who they're going to buy from. Now my services might not be totally like that because we have
Right.
RFP process, blah blah blah, but when
Right.
you think about like you're buying or supporting or giving your money for any reason,
Mhm.
I can see a lot of truth to that. And that brings me back to the nonprofit world because I talk to so many nonprofits. I look at so many websites.
Mhm.
I look at so many mission statements. I hear people describe what they're doing, and I'm just staring at them and blinking, like,
Yeah.
what do you do? And you have to boil it down in a way that's so simple that it almost feels a little insulting.
I'm that dumb, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
But I think because people are all coming at it from different spaces, and I'm a little unique, which is where I think the nonprofit world has it much more difficult because
Right.
the people reaching out to me are typically like leaders of nonprofits that know that they have a fundamental issue with their accounting work.
Yeah.
I have like one main audience, right?
Sure.
The nonprofit world has all these different audiences, whether it's program participants or donors or volunteers
Mhm.
or community leaders that want to collaborate or other nonprofits that want to, team up on all these things. So how do you make what you do simple enough to, um, be relatable or well understood by all of these different people that
Mhm.
come from all of these different angles. It's a
Yeah.
lot.
I
So,
mean,
which means it needs to be even more simple than you even realize, is what that tells me.
simplicity is important, but that also relates to audiences, right? Let's be honest. I think most executive directors in their heart know this is my key audience, or these are my
Mhm.
two key audiences. It's when you get to the board level where the board is like, oh no, no, we have to satisfy this stakeholder and that one. And you simply cannot address six audiences at once. So
Right.
the first recommendation, I know this is a difficult thing to implement, is to have that kind of strength of clarity to pull
Mm,
back to only one or two audiences, because that's going to make life.
mm,
I mean, you can always add more as
sure.
you start to generate that, let's call it revenue engine or mission engine, whatever you want
Right.
to call it. But, at the end of the day, it's easier to apply a story to only one or two audiences as opposed to, six and doing volunteers and doing the, state
Gotcha.
funding and all this type of thing. So, that's the kind of second most important piece of advice that I would provide. Thinking about what we were saying before, another one of the benefits that I think nonprofits do have in terms of their audience is that someone has the problem that you are trying to solve, whether it's a health issue or environmental or
Hmm.
food insecurity. It's just a matter of finding that individual and getting that story in front of them. I know that sounds kind of
Hmm.
well, duh, but these people are already moved. They're already willing to find the organization that's going to solve their problem. So
Hmm.
it's almost like don't make an overthink of it, right? Take
Okay.
that story, make sure it's clear and concise, and then start building that audience online because those individuals will then find you. There's a unique donor and individual for every cause.
Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna save this last question for last.
Mhm.
But before that, it's like, okay, let's talk a little bit more about, we've talked about some of these platforms, this zero click, and these different spaces people are operating in. Let's call
Mhm.
this kind of like the digital marketing space. So for those listeners that are new to these different technologies
Mhm.
and they don't necessarily know where to start, and there's all of these platforms and all these options, like where do we begin? Where do you advise? I hope you stick with the whole keep it simple approach, but it's
Yeah,
very overwhelming for people that it's like, I don't even have time to check my email. And you want me
sure.
to like do what with all these different platforms?
Yeah.
What would you advise with with the digital marketing and all of these different options with technology? Where would a nonprofit leader start here?
Sure. So let's simplify it once more, right? Let's go back to fundamentals. We're going to make sure we have our basic tools in place. That starts with our
Okay.
story in general. Then we want to make sure we're conveying that story properly on our website. At this day and age, every nonprofit has a basic understanding of
Yeah.
how a site operates and what to do there. And then as far as social is concerned, that's also kind of a given these days. Understanding, we have an audience, we pretty much assume they're on this channel or these two channels and, work within those channels to build that. So you have your fundamentals down. The really kind of new and scary and tricky technology is this AI search that I'm talking about.
Hmm.
And the way to get involved there is to simply try it for yourself. Right? I
Okay.
mentioned three platforms before. ChatGPT
Hmm.
is the big one. Claude.ai is my favorite because it's almost like a warm interaction. It's a very kind of comfortable place to be, and they position themselves as kind of the ethical search engine
Okay.
or artificially intelligent bot. And then another one is Perplexity. Perplexity, if you use that one, you're going to see it's the closest to Google that there is in the sense that once you get a response back, it gives you all of the websites that it drew from to get
Okay.
that answer. That's how I started to learn it, is just get involved in terms of toying with these things and seeing what they can do. Because remember, it's not just a matter
Hmm.
of getting answers. They can outright provide functions for you, creating spreadsheets and,
Hmm.
making data look nice and that kind of thing. And it's just a matter of kind of getting your feet wet and understanding how they work. And then from that, hopefully they'll come back to this conversation that you and I are having and start to apply some of the things that we talked about. So it's, there's no excuse for not learning, Tasha. That's really what it comes down to
Yeah.
because we are ourselves as well, too, as an agency, we have to continually be following
Right.
thought leaders on this. Hopefully some people from this conversation will follow us because as we get that information, we publish it as well, too.
Right.
So, I mean, the summation answer to you is make sure you've got your core digital tools and practices down, and then just start to experiment with these platforms. And you can actually ask them what their recommendations are to do these things. That's kind of scary and fun at the same time as well.
Yeah, I've done that. I personally like to play around a lot with just AI,
Yeah,
and I kind of immerse myself in that.
sure.
This is sort of kind of, I always, start with one question, and then my brain just keeps evolving as I'm in the middle of asking a question, which for
Sure.
anyone listening probably knows. That's why I ask long questions, because as I'm saying it, it's like, all right, I just got more and more coming out.
Right.
I always like to ask these questions because I think those listening are always like, this sounds amazing. Who should do this within an organization? Or like, it's like not
Yeah.
maybe a desire or a lack of desire, but it's a lack of like understanding who's the best position for this, whose responsibility should it be? Like for your organizations you work with, like what does that look like internally if they wanted to really start building a more robust marketing plan? Like
Right.
what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a really great question, a great point, because capacity is such an issue, often sometimes more so than actual budget that's, available to be spent on these things.
Hmm.
In our experience, typically, and I hate to say this because I think your audience is going to, get nervous over this, but it's typically the executive director at the end of the
I
day.
was
Uh,
thinking
and
you were going to say
and
that.
it's because it's such a critical function to get to
Hmm.
understand how some of these things work. I think they should really learn themselves how this works, and then they can
Hmm.
always within their group find an individual. It's just another way of putting it is you just don't want to outsource this to someone else and say, here, you figure it out and you teach me. I guess that's an approach, but there's going to be so
Hmm.
many gaps and you're going to miss out on, the opportunity to really, because once you
Hmm.
understand how these things function, you can harness their power to do that. In larger organizations, we have directors of development. They'll
Sure.
take that on, or a director of marketing. But in
Right.
many organizations that don't have that bandwidth, it really does become the executive director. They can outsource it to a volunteer board member. I think that's a
Hmm.
recipe for a problem.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm maybe a little biased too because I serve as essentially the chief marketing officer at this firm, and I feel like when you're an organization that's trying to make big moves, whether you're growing, you're evolving, you're repositioning your brand, or like trying to tell your story, you're trying to define your story. If there's something significant you're trying to do, maybe you're trying to build an online presence, like whatever it is you're trying to do, which I think basically probably most nonprofits fall into this camp.
Mhm.
Other than those that we could speak like really highly to, some of the examples that you gave,
Right.
maybe that are a little further along this journey.
Right.
But I would imagine most people listening here are listening to this because they need help in that area. And I just can't imagine a world where I was not so intimately involved in all of the things. Like before I
Yeah.
got on this call, I was talking to, this consultant we're using for the website. Like I need to know all of the things that are going into this. And
Yeah.
I have so much influence on how we're going to talk about this. And I say this because that's really the role of your chief executive, me included, especially that I have to set the vision for the firm organization. I have to set the tone for how I want to talk about us and the work that we do. I have to set the culture for the employees, and I have to identify like what clients we're going to work with and what services we offer. Like ultimately that falls on like my responsibility to do. So who better to figure out how we're going to talk about that than me? I just can't
Yeah.
imagine a world where this would actually get to my vision, or me have a vision and then someone else is just able to just take that and run with it and create something that is so well synchronized with that. Yeah, it's an unpopular probably conclusion because I think people are listening like, oh my gosh, this is so daunting. Like, I don't have time for this. But it's so incredibly important to get alignment on your vision from the CEO to the, all of the inner workings of what's happening within the marketing, messaging, branding, and make sure that that's what the public sees. It's just an area that I don't think CEOs can delegate. The mechanics of it, the execute, like,
Exactly.
like I have a team that will, create the graphics and the content and the social, but even on a monthly basis, I'm reviewing what are the themes, topics, content going out. I'm proofreading a lot of the things. Like I still give my final approval on it. So it's not like just go do marketing and
Right.
it's kind of in a silo. I find the most successful organizations have a very collaborative effort with the CEO playing a huge part in what that storytelling is going to be.
Yeah, and you just came across or pointed out something really big in the nonprofit industry, which is, you know, we both can agree that executive directors really have so much on their plate, right? They're the fundraiser in chief. They set the strategy. They're responsible for mission and all of these different things. And I feel that, marketing over the last course of, how many years really kind of falls by the wayside. It's something I will get to
Mhm.
at some point. But if you can start to embrace that as something mission critical to the organization, it makes all of what you just talked about a little bit easier because you're
Mhm.
ranking it up there. Just as I have to go out and get funding, I also have to make sure that people are aware of what we do, right? We can't
Mhm.
raise these funds if we have no presence, if our brand is shot, if our website doesn't work.
Mhm.
So it's really important to elevate that concept of marketing in your mind as an executive director.
Yeah.
And then to your point, you're not responsible for execution, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you are in the sense of overseeing it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But just all I'm kind of urging your listeners to do if you're executive director, if you're in that position, is to learn about the basics that you need to know here. Take marketing seriously as an engine to growing your organization. And then
Hmm.
there's numerous opportunities or individuals that can help you out there. I mean, you can come to an agency like us. You can keep it in-house if you have capacity.
Hmm.
You can go to a platform like Upwork, which I'm sure you're familiar
Yeah.
with, Tasha,
Hmm.
where a person can get a
Hmm.
freelancer. But coming back to your original point, you really need to understand, what the organization stands for and understand these different tools and how you're going to use them.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm sharing this because I'm usually kind of an open book and transparent, but I've been I've kind of gone on this journey myself with marketing, which is why I love talking about this. And to your point with like outsourcing, I think some people don't really know what that looks like or how to normalize like what does a really robust marketing function look like. And I think people that are listening, like, oh wow, you guys do so much stuff at the Charity CFO, but I still don't have a full-time
Mhm.
marketing person. I
Right.
leverage a few contractors for a variety of different things. I have a marketing specialist that has a bit of a hybrid role, and she kind of serves as quarterback. But I'm essentially function as the chief marketing officer, and I set the vision for everything. I'm like, this is what I want, this is what I like, and et cetera. She kind of plays quarterback with making sure that all the contractors get the things that they owe us, and she kind of schedules everything out. She also kind of manages our social media, so that's been really powerful. But look, we've been at this for 9 years, and
Yeah.
we're hitting double digits, like over $10 million in revenue a year,
Yeah.
and
It's
we're
wonderful.
just now getting to the point we still don't even have a full-time marketing
Yeah.
person. So if you are an organization that's like, I have $1 million of revenue and I don't have the money to invest in this, like you are not alone in that, and know that that's totally normal to not be able to afford a marketing
Exactly.
function in-house. But what other businesses do, for profit, nonprofit, regardless of size, you have to be very large typically to invest in a full-time marketing person. Here's a little myth that people don't realize, and I've made a lot of very expensive lessons learned as a result of this. But oftentimes, I think we hire a marketing person. I've done this a couple times. I've learned my lesson now, that where we hire a marketing person and we think they can do all of the things marketing. And if you want it to be done well, you've got to think about marketing in the same way you would think about your lawyer. You wouldn't hire an employment
It's a
law
great
attorney to
comparison.
represent you on a medical like
Right.
malpractice claim. Like you wouldn't, if you were going through a messy divorce, go hire, labor relations, specialists. Like they all have
Right.
their individual skills, talents, and experience. And so marketing, again, I've made all the mistakes, very expensive ones too. Like when you're working with a graphics person, they may not be and probably aren't great at writing copy, right? And if you have somebody that can write copy, they're probably not going to be very good at creating graphics or editing your content. And then even if they're good at all those things, they may not be very good at setting strategy.
Mhm.
Okay. So like I pay all of the contractors and I'm still setting strategy. So I don't know if that's a little bit of validation or a little bit of hope, or hopefully
Mhm.
y'all can learn from my very expensive lessons learned, that it really is a world where most people that are, I think, doing it really well, I'm biased, I like to think we're doing a pretty good job.
Mhm.
It's a diffusion of responsibilities
Right.
across a number of different consultants. And the trickiest part that I've really been trying to figure out over the last couple of years is, what does that look like operationally for us to keep our finger on the pulse as all of these things are moving around? And Lou, I've talked to marketing folks like you. I'm like, Lou, what am I doing wrong? This is so
Mhm.
chaotic. This is so
Right.
disorganized. And they're like, yeah, Tasha, that's normal. I go, oh, good. I mean, I don't know if
Right.
that's good or bad, but at least you validated me. And
Right.
people have started explaining that sometimes it looks a little bit more like a project manager role
Yeah.
internally
Yeah.
to like get these things all coming together and out the door in a way that makes sense. So anyone listening, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to go hire, a marketing specialist at,
Mhm.
$50,000 a year. Like, save yourself the trouble. That's probably not actually the answer. I'm
Right.
speaking from my own experience here.
Yeah, it makes me think of the concept of CMO. We hear that sometimes. Oh, I need a chief marketing officer. Well, you need to be pretty well along for that to happen. And at the end of the day, the CMO is responsible for the brand, right?
Right.
All of those different functions that you're talking about fall under that. They require different levels of expertise and types of expertise. So the model that you're offering, I think, makes total sense, where it's the
Right.
executive director who sets the vision, knows how they want to be perceived in the marketplace, has a general direction of where they want to go, understands the tools basically, and then is
Hmm.
able to assign those things to different people. I'm just going to say, even if they are volunteers, right? I like to
Right.
kind of shy away from that because the volunteer isn't necessarily as dedicated and consistent as they should be as far as marketing is concerned. But some, organizations need to turn to them as long as you feel they have the skills within what you're trying to do and they're dependable. That's an option.
Yeah. Yeah. Lou, I know we're running out of time, but I have this other last idea for, I don't know, some unsolicited, maybe hopefully practical advice for those listening.
Mhm.
And you tell me if this is a wrong
Sure.
approach. If you're listening to this and you're overwhelmed, like, Tasha, I am not a marketing expert. I don't know how to get started. I don't know how to set strategy. I don't know how to do these things. I joke oftentimes that I'm the chief marketing officer and I have zero business being a chief marketing officer.
Right.
So I'm with you there. But Lou, is it reasonable to kind of go with the approach that I have? I don't necessarily know what I want. I don't have a crystal clear vision of like forever and ever and ever, this is what we're going to be. But sometimes it's easier to start with what do we not want? What do we not want to say? What do we not want to show? And so for me, that looks like I don't want to be super like stuffy and unapproachable. Accountants tend to be very, the tone can kind of come across a little condescending, right? So like, I don't want that, or I don't want this. I don't know. I'm not prepared for this specific examples of what I
Right.
don't want, but for an organization, like I don't want to, discourage this, or I don't want to look like everyone else, and I don't want to, whatever it might be. I don't want to be speaking to adults in all of my copy when my target is actually youth or something. I'm
Right.
making something up,
Sure.
right? I think sometimes it's easier for me to figure out what I don't want because when I'm talking to these experts I'm working with and they're like, Tasha, what about this idea? And what about that idea? I'm like,
Mm.
I can't tell you exactly what I want, but I definitely don't want that. And
Right.
that at least helps a little
Right.
bit. So starting with things that you know are non-negotiable for your story or your organization or things that you feel very passionately like that's not the direction we're going in. That's helped me kind
Mhm.
of get going on this path of figuring out who we're going to be and how we're going to speak about that.
I think it's a fine approach. The key word there is to start, right? It's a
Yeah.
good, to start by this kind of, I guess it's reductive reasoning,
Right.
right? We know what we don't want to be, right? But at the end of the day, I would encourage anyone listening at the end of the day, you just have to start. And
Start.
what's the phrase, Tasha? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Is that or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
right? In
Yep.
other words, just like this idea, because I'm guilty of this as well too. Right now we're redesigning our website and I'm spending just too much time on the copy. And I'm saying, oh no, because this person won't like that. It has to be,
Yep.
you just got to get it out
Get it
there
done.
and
Get
then be
out.
willing to iterate along the way. I mean, it's
Hmm.
highly unlikely that you're going to make such a catastrophic mistake that,
Right.
your organization is dented permanently. So, kind of get over that perfectionist tendency, take away the things you don't want, as you mentioned,
Hmm.
and then just get started. But you got to keep your ear to the ground after that. You can't just put it out and then a year later come back to it. Marketing is a continual approach.
I love that you said that. And I think that's a great ending point and a takeaway that marketing is a continuous approach. And I think sometimes in the world, at least in my experience, when I've had these sort of conversations working in a nonprofit and we start talking about marketing, we should not confuse marketing with branding specifically. It's so much
Right.
bigger than that, right?
Correct.
And sharing our story or knowing our story and communicating that out into the world is not necessarily certainly the same as branding. And I've been through this very painful process for which we are rebranding. And when you go back to the commitment to perfection, and I'm sure because you're in this space, like the amount of time, energy, and resources that nonprofits put into making sure that something is completely perfect.
Right.
Maybe that makes sense for the investment on like re-logos, but the creating a new logo,
Rebranding.
but
Yep.
not when we're just continuously refining our
That's
story,
right.
maybe and sharing information out into the world and tweaking the messaging on our website and all of those things, to your point, should be a continuous process. And there's not a perfection, end date, finish line. Now we can go out there and speak to this.
I'll just encapsulate that really quick. One of the questions we always get when we redesign a site for a client is, if we work with you now, how many more years before I have to go back and redesign it? And my answer is always, that's up to you, right? If we launch this site and you are taking care of it and looking at it weekly, monthly, updating,
Hmm.
changing the site to the, the whims of society, that's not the
Right.
right phrase, but as society adapts, you're changing. You can keep the site indefinitely. It's those that just make the investment, go off and do their thing and never come back to it, that they
Hmm.
come back to us 2, 3, 5 years later and say, oh, the site's outdated, we need to redo it. So yeah, definitely, continuity, consistency are key.
Well, it's funny. I can keep going on these, but yeah, I've noticed like the longer you kind of like set it and forget it your website, the more money you're going to spend on like rebuilding the entire thing, like long
Right. That's
term,
right.
right?
100%. I can prove that to you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when
Mhm.
I first redid the website, it's like, oh my gosh, it was like big investment. And now it's like we just did it 2 years ago and I'm redoing
Yeah.
it again. It's like, oh, it's only this much. And I was like so surprised. It's like, well, we can use a lot of the things you already have. We're
Right.
changing a lot of things, but in the back end, it's not actually as much as it looks like.
Yeah.
So yeah, the continuous investment in it will feel less daunting and probably literally less expensive long term if you're constantly investing in it.
That's
So I'm
correct.
sure, Lou, a lot of people are listening and, thinking, yeah, we need to do something differently. I don't know what it looks like. Thank you, Tasha, for telling me to not just go out and hire that marketing person straight
Mhm.
away and think that's going to solve all of our problems. Maybe people need to start having some conversations with just some marketing consulting firms and start figuring out what are the different skills and
Mhm.
um, scope of work. Like, what does this look like if I hire the right experts for the right elements of my marketing? There's, certainly work that you do. If people are trying to start this journey or progress down this journey and want to have more conversations with you or follow along with the work that you're doing, what is the best way for them to get in touch to kind of initiate these conversations?
Sure. And I love having these discussions, by the way. It doesn't necessarily have to end in some kind of a, work arrangement or project.
Hmm.
I love the industry and I love having these conversations around different types of
Hmm.
marketing. So, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. People can
Okay.
find me at my handle there, Lou Kotsinis. You're gonna have to spell that one for them in
They'll have it on the
in,
show.
in
We'll
the
we'll put
link.
it on the show notes. Exactly.
Unless you speak Greek, it's going to be hard to. So Lou could send us on LinkedIn, and then just visit our website, bcsinteractive.com. Take a
Okay.
look at some of the blogs and case studies we have there because those are kind of practical applications of what you and I are talking about, and
Okay.
they can find us that way and reach out to me at any point. I'm happy to have these types of discussions.
Okay, that sounds like a great plan. You all know I like to do the shameless plug. This information is, in the spirit of like digital marketing and all the things, right? It comes across people's platforms because you all engage with the content. The more you engage with it, like, subscribe, share, repost, whatever it might be, the more other leaders of nonprofits are going to be able to come across tips and tricks like this. And that's what really this is all about. So if you could just do me a favor, if you found this information helpful in any way, just do the simplest thing, like it. I don't make the rules. It's the world of, meta. So thank you all again so much for listening. I hope you found this really insightful, and just best wishes to all of the challenges ahead with marketing and continuing to get the word out for the amazing work that you all are doing. Thank you again so much. See you next time.